Thank you so much for having me. So I founded Current Future about 12 months ago. It's been an amazing, wild ride, and I'm very thankful for a lot of people in this room. So Pete was one of the people I tested the business concept with initially. Well, I did set a whole lot of conversations that happened in 6 weeks, and Pete was one of those and really inspired me to get the business going and to do some good things. Also very thankful to a whole lot of people in the search community. So we've done some work with in New Zealand, Melbourne, Brisbane, Wellington, and Darwin. But in terms of what we do, we are a team of C-level execs. Everyone in the team has been a C-level exec and worked in a PE or VC-owned environment. So really hard-nosed operators. There are no consultants on the team. I'm the only one who's ever been a consultant ever. Everyone is a genuine operator and an absolute expert at what they do. In terms of the work we've done within the search community, we've actually worked with these clients in our first year. And just to give you a sense of what that looks like, I've got to make sure I keep remembering that if I turn that way, you can't hear me so well. But, so our first job in the search community was we actually built a finance function for Triple S in New Zealand. Really good example of how we operate. We initially went into the business, I think it was about 6 weeks after the transaction had closed. Our job there was really to understand what on earth was going on. And we ended up narrowing it down to say, the first job here is to build a finance function, to build that really quickly. So we rolled up our sleeves. We had someone in there who was a financial controller experience, CFO experience, and me. And we built the finance function in about 4 months, then operated in an interim role to get to the final point where we built the team, we recruited the head of finance, we did the onboarding, and then now we're in the background supporting those people as they go through. It's been great doing some work with Ace and Multi-Skills in Melbourne. Again, that job there which Kate from our team did. Much more focused around go-to-market, marketing automations, brand, how does that play out? Steve from our team here also has done a lot of work at SRO, and that's the experience where we actually called Pete and said, we've come to what we needed to do. And he said, no, you haven't. Here's a whole lot of other things we want you to do as well. And we've been getting stuck into those for about 6 months now. So it gives you a sense of the type of things we do. Again, go-to-market strategy, technology, finance functions. We do people and culture reviews, and also there's some board advisory work that we've been doing as well. Again, just leaning on those C-level execs to do a broad range of things, but it's all about getting shit done. So in terms of how to set you guys up for success, what I've done is to prepare for this is I've actually interviewed a number of CEOs from the search community. I've also interviewed some people who've come in a private equity environment as well. Thought about my own experience when I've been a CEO and also going into different functions along the way. So hopefully we can share some learnings around this, but also get you guys thinking about how's it going to feel in different situations. Because that's the most important piece here. As the searchers, as the investors, as the directors becoming involved in these businesses, straight away it comes down to the individual and how you're going to respond in certain situations. And hopefully there's some questions we'll ask along the way today, but also get you thinking about some practical things. The biggest single challenge that has come out of all the discussions, by far, is context shifting. And this, you might sit there and say, well, how is that important in the first 90 days? This is critical. And it's about the mindset and how you go through different stages. If you think about it, you've gone through that journey to say, I'm going to become a searcher. That's step one. That might have taken several months, a lot of exploratory chats, and you come to that particular point. Your mind then shifts to raising the first fund if you're a funded searcher. You then go through and you find your deal. You've gone through the pipeline. You've actually started fundraising for that deal. You're going through the execution of that deal. It's a really logical period of time. And so what's important to understand is as soon as that deal is completed, that shifts entirely. And so all of a sudden you go from this very binary situation. The deal's going to happen or it's not going to happen. We then go through the logic of the modelling, going through the legal docs. I'm actually a reformed accountant and reformed lawyer. So really good at conversation. But the idea here is you have to be able to be prepared to shift from one stage to the next and think about how is that going to feel and how you're going to cope with that at each stage. When you go into the business, as I'm talking about here, emotion will always trump logic. You think about the businesses you're buying. One of the indicators for us that was really interesting around how we work with search businesses. we have a process we go through, we survey people, we give them a sense of learning what they're doing, what they're actually doing in the business, etc. And one of the questions we'd ask is, have they been here for less than 1 year, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, 5 years plus? In the case of search funds, we have to actually extend that out to say 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20, 20 plus. And there's always people in that 20 plus bracket. Think about how they're going to feel. What's actually happening to them is they feel like they're part of the family, as part of this family business, and they just feel like they've been sold. That's an enormous shift to have to go through in the mindset of the people you're working with. One of the techniques that I really recommend and has come out of some successful transitions for a few people is really being detailed about how you map out the stakeholders. Who are all the stakeholders that are going to be on that journey? If you think about that path on the left-hand side, every single stage of the journey has a different group of people around you, and being ready to context shift around those conversations. In particular, thinking about the team that you're inheriting, being really clear, understanding what they're actually doing, not just what their role description says, and being able to understand how they're going to react to certain things, how they're going to react to the pressure of being held accountable for the first time or in a different way. How's it going to feel when the founder's moved on? And the important piece here is around how do you really tailor your communication to those people? You're going through a world where you're having conversations about IRR, you're having conversations about cash flow. In the new world, it's about what happens to my job now. How do you give them confidence? And one of the things that's I found to be really, really helpful in some situations, and Luke talks about this from Triple S, investing in the leadership team really early is a really good visible demonstration to the core people in the business about how you're actually going to help them to progress within the new environment. Does that make sense? Yeah? And by the way, if you have any questions, this is meant to be a chat. So jump in. One thing just to think about really quickly, and this is important for establishing the board as well. How can you manage things structurally in your shareholders agreement and in your fund structure to think about how is your board going to come together? How do you start to dictate that, it may not be that if you make an investment, that means you're coming onto the board. What does that need to look like? So in a lot of cases, these businesses that you're working with have never had a board. The board is constituted in a normal corporate environment. When you're making an acquisition, there'll be a board, there'll be an investment committee, there are people who are coming on the journey. In a search environment, the board comes together when the deal is being done. It's important to try and think about how you're going to deal with that, how you're going to set up your board, how you're going to get them through that period of forming, storming and norming, which sounds old school, but it's 100% right. And if you think about the situation where in a particular transaction, they take you through the transaction, they come on board. It's very hard to do that process and form a team as a board if you're meeting once a month for 2 hours or once a quarter. How do you try and bring that board together really, really quickly? So in terms of what we recommend here and what others have done really, really well is they spend time understanding what that board's going to look like. They think about what it's like, how is it going to feel to work with those people. As I said, setting the rules around how that can be done at the fundraising stage is critical. I think that sets the tone for how things are going to come together. Thinking about the mix of contributions, I'm on the board of CarriageWorks up the road here in Redfern. And one of the things we do there every 6 months is actually do a matrix. What are the skills we have? What are the skills we really need? And do we need to make any adjustments to the subcommittee or the board? I think it's important to have that type of practice in what you're doing now. Initially, you'll be going through a process where the board will come together. They will start to look at the business in that post-acquisition period, how they're going to feel about the change in operations. A different skill set is needed when you get to the point where you're preparing for exit quite often. And this other piece here around making sure people understand their roles on the board, being really deliberate. What a lot of the searchers talked to me about was saying, that person X joined on the board. Their expertise is exactly these 3 things. They know that's why they're there. They're very clear about that. And they're very clear about everybody else's skills so they know how to work together and how to overlap and not overlap. Does that make sense? Yeah? So you go through this process. You've gone through the valuations, it's very rational. You've gone through the documentation, it's very rational. You then start to create your board, you're ready to go, and you're walking on day 1 and you're the CEO. just pause and think about how that feels. And talking to some of the other guys who've stepped into that role, they feel like they walk through the front door and everybody's looking at them. And for a lot of them, it's completely new news that you're going to be there in the first place. So it's a really important thing to think about how you're going to make that transition into being a CEO and what does that mean. So the point here is that how does that point about how you feel about it is important from a resilience perspective as well. Luke's comment yesterday, which he's shared with me many times, about everything's planned and going well until you get punched in the face. So start to think about how are you going to respond to those situations where you are going to get punched in the face, and you will, and how do you make sure you de-risk that by having the right mix of people around you in terms of support. Do you need to have professional advisors, accountants, tax advisors, lawyers, etc., us to an extent? Or do you need to have a support network around your board, others who are mentors to you and who can take you on that journey as you go through? The amazing thing about the search environment is that everybody is so supportive of each other. And that's, I think, a real testament to the way that this community has come together and the way that they cross-invest in each other, the way they share resources, the way they talk about how their journey's been and how they're getting through it. This final point about how do you actually motivate and invest in your team, and I'm going to move over this side now just for something different, but how are you going to motivate and invest in them? Ryan tells an amazing story from Grima. Ryan comes from a military background, and what he's learnt through his work there is that how do you motivate people without a financial bent? What does that look like? And how do you actually use those skills to be able to incentivize the team, get them on board and get them excited about the business? So really starting to think about how are you going to invest in that team and how are you going to motivate them at the end of the day? Cool? What other things do you guys think about? Those who have actually stepped into the CEO role or those who are about to or are planning to one day, what are some of the other things that you start to think about? Don't do it to me. Don't. Here we go. The culture of the team. And why?
Set up that mission, how you want to perceive as a brand.
Yep.
Where you want the people to go, with that brand or what objective.
Yep.
So that culture, what is going to be? Is it going to be low price? Is it going to be a premium product?
Yep.
Where are we going? Where are we heading?
So the comment there, just so everyone else can hear what it's saying, what's the culture going to be? What's the vision for the business going to be? How am I going to start to communicate that to people? Does that make sense? What else? Is anyone else go on, right? Not right? Yep. I think there's a really good way of just talking to the other searchers about how they've gone through it and how they've approached it. I think also spending time with the key leadership really, really quickly. It will be new. There's nothing you can do about that. There's nothing you can do to soften that. But they're looking for a plan about what you're going to do. They're looking at a plan for how you're going to engage and that really early messaging around, I just want to learn from you. I want to learn what your role is. I want to learn about you as a person. They won't care at all about an IRR. They won't care about a financial model. All they want to know is what's it going to mean for me personally and giving them the opportunity to share their story with you. And believe me, it's going to take time, a lot of time just to invest and understand those people as they go through it. Yeah. Hello.
How do you get visibility quickly?
Visibility quickly? Well, so I'm glad you asked. Let's just go straight onto it. Getting the handle on numbers. That was not staged, but it was beautiful. So in terms of getting your handle on the numbers really quickly, this is critical. And so trying to understand what are the drivers, all the numbers up until this point are completely in theory. How do you actually go into your models, go into the environment and get a handle on what is actually happening in the business? One of the things that came out of the conversations is every single person who I spoke to has had some sort of shock financially in their first 12 months of some sort. And so what they wish they had done in preparing for that first phase was build that shock into your model and understand what that feels like, understand which levers you have to pull to solve that. And a really simple example could be, imagine New Zealand's gone into recession. What does that mean? Government spending's falling off a cliff. What does it mean if you lose your top 2 customers, which equates to 20% of revenue like that? And that's happened as well for some of our clients. How are you going to respond to that? And actually building that into the model, and back to your point about how do you get to the bottom of and get a handle of what's going on quickly, if you can start to plan for those types of things early on, amongst all the other millions of things you have to do, it gives you a sense of what levers you can play with and how you can try and solve those. When you go into the business, you can start to look in, are those levers real? Are they the types of things you can actually pull, and what are your constraints around that? A really quick example about how that plays out. Revenue drops by 20%. What's the first thing you think of to try and curb your costs? Sorry?
Headcount.
Headcount? Go back to my comment before. You've got a whole lot of people who've been there for 20 years or more. What's going to be on the books? Long service leave, annual leave. You start to trim your headcount and you pick out the people who've been there forever, all of a sudden you've got a massive cost burden in a period of time when you're going to need that cash to survive. So it's those types of things that you can only see if you start to get to the bottom of what's going on really, really quickly and seeing where things are at in terms of the financial models, the financial reporting. Number of times we get brought in where the financial information is substandard at best, and in some cases non-existent. We have had one client where they were saying, I was looking at the bank balance each day to see if it was going up or down. That is some of the situations you might find yourself in this situation. So really, really practically, how do you deal with that? And a lot of that comes from raising a little bit of cash, keeping powder dry. The other thing to think about is all deals are imperfect. They just are by their very nature. And so it's not about whether it's perfect or not, it's about how you're going to cope with those things when they come to fruition, that be upside or downside. There are good stories as well, but they're good. It's how you prepare for the bad ones as well. So point number 1 there, do you have accurate financial reporting? Can you get your head around that really, really quickly? Super important to get a feel for the business. What are your levers? What are the things, if you lose that key customer, you lose 20% of revenue, the GM walks out the door, what are your levers to solve those challenges really, really quickly? And what needs to change rapidly? So in some situations when we go in, we just need to get the finance function and the reporting sorted out super rapidly. I've got no visibility on this. Can you help us do that really quickly? So do your best to get a sense of things. It won't be perfect. Often you'll be looking at things in the rear vision mirror, but it's about making sure that the rear vision mirror is not looking 6 weeks back, it's only looking back a couple of weeks at worst. Does that make sense? Yeah? Focus on revenue. Revenue solves everything, more or less. But the idea there is, how do you get your head around your customers? How do you get your head around their needs? How do you understand what's going on? And one of the things that was shared with me as an example of, I think, doing things fantastically well, as soon as possible. Once you've had your first conversations with people around how do you feel about being part of the new world, and you've got past that leadership stuff, I'm going to invest in you, etc. Getting out and seeing customers as soon as possible with your team is absolute the number 1 thing to do to make success of what you're doing at the moment. And so what that also invites you to do through a period of learning is to actually follow the paper trail all the way through. So one of the best examples I heard was actually sitting down and saying, I'm going to see customer number 1. I'm going to go back and look at their contract and read their contract. And I'll look at all the sales to them over a period of time. How's it moved? How's it changed? Inform yourself on it. If there's a renewal process, cite the renewal process. You're making sure that your revenue is being captured, the execution and the delivery of work for those particular customers is all fine at the back end. You'll learn so much through that phase. The next thing is you get out to seeing your customer. You're on site with them. You can see your product being used there. You can see what it means to have them as a customer, and actually work that through. Get feedback. What's important to them now? What's important in the future? We did a little piece of work, which Kate and I did for ACE, where we started a process of client listening. So we went out and we set a formal process around trying to unpack what's really, really important to customers and what are the opportunities that come off the back of that. We found a whole lot of revenue that was potentially left on the table from the early stages or from the previous owners. because you're able to go out there and see for yourself what's important to them. Find out they've got 5 other divisions that are not using your product. How can you sell into them as a warm lead? So I really recommend spending that time around the customer. So I think we've covered all that off to give you a sense of where we're at. So again, invest time with customers, get into the weeds on customers early. I'd also say, number one, supplier, do absolutely the same thing. Particularly if you've got some sort of raw materials coming in, that's critical to the business. Getting your head around that key supplier arrangement. What are your terms? You'll get a good feel for it. Worst thing you can find is your supplier's on terms of 2 weeks, but your customer's on terms of 6 weeks, and all of a sudden you've got a cash flow problem. And that was really it. So there were the 5 really big themes that came out of the conversations that I had about what was really, really important in those first 90 days, getting a sense of how to execute on your deal. Again, really encourage you guys to spend time with the people, time with the customers, time with the suppliers. Get your head around the financial information as fast as you possibly can. But most importantly, make sure you've got that support network around you that's going to be there to support you through those periods of change, the context shifting as well. So I just want to pause there. You probably noticed I haven't gone down the path of a 90-day plan or anything like that. You can get that in the textbook, right? This is about how you try and get some more practical examples of what's important from what we've seen. And then we'll talk a bit more about, from Kate's perspective, about approaching the customer in marketing and revenue, and then Steve's perspective about business transformation and technology. So I just want to pause there and just see if there's any questions around that. And I know there's probably a lot that's going through your heads after the last couple of days. Tom.
Recently purchased a business 5 months ago. Founder had 0 financial transparency with the team.
Yep.
He stepped out as sort of background. I want to get to a point where we start bringing some financial transparency with senior leadership.
Yep.
But they haven't seen it.
Yep.
How soon is too soon? How late is too late? What
Yeah.
do you do in that situation?
And tell me if I get this right, just to relay the question so everyone can hear it. Recently bought a business. There's been very little financial transparency. How do you introduce that information into the broader group?
Or even just the senior leadership?
Yeah. Well, knowledge is power. And what we've found in a lot of the business we worked with is that the businesses are run intuitively. So the founder has so much in their head, and part of the value of being able to run the business is to be able to extract that and turn that into processes so it can stand on its own 2 feet. When in the absence of financial information, the team will always make assumptions and fill that gap, which means there's a whole lot of myths that are sitting around the business. And so if you start to dispel those myths, it actually disturbs the social fabric of the business in some situations. So when, for example, we worked with Luke, their financial situation reporting from the previous owner was incredibly poor, and it was known through the diligence process. When we started to produce the reports, it's like, okay, because I just want to send it on to the teams, I can see it. It's like, no. You need to think about how this information is going to be received and what are the critical pieces you can start to drip feed to build their knowledge up really quickly, and be conscious of the myths that are out there that are going to be dispelled by this. Because the other thing is, if people have myths in their minds from watching an intuitive founder, they're so ingrained after sometimes 20 years that if you start to share something that's so counter to that, all of a sudden they just say, well, that can't be right. It can't be right. It just can't be. We've been operating like this forever. And so really challenge you to think about how do you share that information in a way which educates slowly over time, and also gets to a point where you're starting to gradually break down the myths that are in the business from what the information gaps that have been there in the past. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Sorry. Can I just pick up on that, because I'm actually dealing with something like that at the moment.
This is Steve Aulio, who's going to be speaking later on, but we'll do an introduction now.
Sorry, I'm actually dealing with that. Hello? I'm dealing with that at the moment in a real life situation where revenue's been going up, so all the team are saying, where are bonuses? And actually profitability is going down, but there's no visibility. So no one knows about that. And what we've found, the way we're going to do it, is to start off, you think about, do I have to disclose all the financial information to them? Absolutely not. What we're going to do is build dashboards and give them insights as to key metrics, so they start to get an appreciation for those key elements that we need them to take more responsibility for, so that we can get that bottom line right. So don't think of how much should we disclose as, let's just give them all this information that they've never had before. And you've got to take them through an education process as well, because a lot of these people are more junior and don't have a full appreciation for how all elements of that P&L come through to your bottom line. So it's a process, and I would highly encourage it, because it's quite interesting to see their response and how much more responsibility they take along that journey.
Yeah, cool. Next question. This is better. This is good. Everyone's engaged, or one person is. Marco,
How do you communicate the vision for the company?
what do you mean by division?
Where you want to go, where you want it to
Oh, the vision. Yeah.
the vision, yes.
Again, I think our approach, and Kate and I have done this as well on another client, where part of the ability to get people on board to go forward is to give them the opportunity to share what they think the vision could be as well. And so if you think about that early stage of a business, post-acquisition, it's not going to be a period of time where you can really fundamentally change things in the short term. So how do you try and get them to share all their views? So what we've done in the past is we've done a whole lot of surveys, we've done a whole lot of interviews with people, and started to get them talking one-on-one and get their thought process going about what would they do with the business? What would they do with this particular function? What would they do about manufacturing? What would they do about, in our case, designing of a training app? So how do you start? So trying to create opportunities for that creative vision from the team who have been there for so long to start to bubble it to the surface, even if it's miles off par for 90% of it, there'll be some little nuggets there that you can show that you've listened to them and that they can contribute to the overall. So what we would tend to do is to let it bubble from the bottom up first, get the leadership group together. We've then run a session. We bring it all out onto the butcher's paper, and we start to get people to narrow it down. At the end of the day, it becomes a more refined vision that comes from the bottom up. And then when you start to go into the next layer of what you're going to really, really do with the business, that's usually down the track as well. And so you can start to give those early messages to condition towards that. So you get that indication of, we're going to invest in the leadership team. After that, we're going to look to buy additional businesses like us. It starts to get exciting, right? And so how you can try and get them excited about what the plan is. But again, similar to the releasing of financial information, how you release your vision as well needs to be, in my view, incremental to get people to a better position so they accept it. What else have we got?
What about all changes? Do you think they can be incremental, or you need to modify, restructure, etc. to do that over time?
Yeah. So the question there for everyone who at the back of may not have heard that, it's about what do you do around all changes? It's a really, really tough one. I'd say that you look at on a case-by-case basis to think about, you mapped out your stakeholders, you're starting to think about practically how they're going to respond to those types of things. There are some people where you can actually give a direct message. I've got one at the moment in Melbourne, not a search fund business, but another client where the founder has brought in a CEO to start running the business. We've just started the onboarding process and we made the initial announcement. We know full well that 2 of the 4 in the leadership team are already in the barrel. And so we're working through how do we try and make that transition, because that'll be a big change. What we actually started to do in that situation was we went through the process, we surveyed, we interviewed, and we're going through, and I just got a whole lot of feedback back about these 2 people. And these 2 people are clearly not respected by the team. But if we go onto the path of saying that person needs to change, that role needs to change, we didn't have that sort of data in the background, we wouldn't be able to understand how the rest of the team is going to respond to that. So I think being patient on a lot of those things, there's a lot of corporate knowledge in those individuals often, but there are some cases where you sit there and say, okay, we've got this sorted, we think it's better for this person to go, and it can happen quite quickly. So I think the context needs to be taken into consideration to work through what that looks like. But again, at the same time, how are you going to, all of a sudden, people who see a change like that think, well, am I going to have to pick up their workload? And so how do you try and manage the communication around that? So you're saying, okay, this person's finished today. The reason is this. and now the way we're going to allocate that work and get on with it is this, this, and this. And usually the business recovers pretty quickly, but I think just being able to understand the context of what it's going to mean to the broader business will give you a better outcome at the end of the day.
Staff retention.
Staff retention?
Yeah, so you become a new CEO,
Yep.
they don't like you straight away.
Yep.
How do you turn around and make sure that that's
I think invest in the leadership. And I think the other feedback that from a staff retention position that people talk about with us is where it works well, investing in 1 or 2 additional skills if you can afford it that are really punchy and are going to contribute and add to the leadership team at the end of the day. So
success stories that they will turn around for?
yeah, Luke in Triple S has got a really good story around how he's invested in the team and brought in some extra skills at the right time. They didn't have they were a division out of a bigger business, and so they had an impetus to bring new roles in, like a head of finance, for example. So I think bringing those roles in and understanding what it means, but also if you can go back to the team and say, because you've had the discussions, you've researched the responses, you've thought about your stakeholders, you then come to a point of saying, okay, I know how that person's going to react to an addition to the team, and keeping them on board around that. So you can say, we're investing in the team, we're investing in the business. There's some more questions.
How do you think about the role of the outgoing CEO owner in that transition period?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And I think, again, it becomes, going back to James' really good point around the term sheet and talking about what the expectations are. What's been really interesting, where I see there's real problems with that, and where there's no clarity around what the role is going to be. And the role is going to be different depending on who the founder is, what their personality is, what the business is, and being able to manage that through. So I think being able to be clear around that, being clear around the transaction. What's come out of all the conversations I had in preparing for today as well is never shit can the previous owner. Never, ever. It's like saying your dad or your mum is a terrible person. So never shit can them. Always be respectful of the business that they've built. And then that also can help with the transition. Ryan's got a really good example where at Grimer, he has an amazing, amazing relationship with the vendor to the point where the vendor's son and daughter actually work in the business. And that's an amazing position to be in because it means you can start to gather those little bits of information about the business post-acquisition, which may not have been in the diligence reports. Cool. There were some more hands that were up before. Go for it. So what was your name? Cameron. Cameron?
Yeah, Cameron.
Brother.
Okay.
Yeah.
What would you do differently, or what is different if you do a bolt-on? So you talked
Yeah.
about on the initial acquisition, but if you do a bolt-on, what's different about what are the other things to consider?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. We've been asked to look at some bolt-ons for some private equity funds and their portfolio companies. I think, the one engagement that Kate and I were planning for, it's now on ice, but it's coming back, I've been told yesterday anyway, to do the diligence process as you would to buy the original mothership. Start to think about how you're going to bring the team together, how you're going to bring the technology together. Is it B into A? Is it running separately? Is it something new? Thinking about that, how you're going to go to market from a sales and marketing perspective. What are the efficiencies that you've got there? Probably the one thing that came out of that transaction was that really stunned us was pricing models. So I'll come back to functional team in a second, but the pricing models that we found, there's 2 targets. One had a bottom-up pricing where you just added things on all the way up. The other one was an all-you-could-eat at the other end. And what that actually meant was that all the staff incentives around revenue and profitability were completely the opposite to each other. And so the number one line in their synergies page was move everyone into a single office. They couldn't do it because of the water cooler chat around how people are paid. And so it's things like that that are unexpected to take on board and really get to the bottom of when you bring it in. And that comes back to the social fabric of how the team operates, how that structure is set up. I think that people are going to be more comfortable from company A bringing in company B than company B going into company A. And the reason for that is they've been conditioned to it. They know you, they understand what's going on, and they have a really good sense of how things are going to be dealt with. Use those people as your advocates and your cultural ambassadors to bring the new business in. Thank you so much. I'm very thankful also to this community for how they've supported our business and given us some opportunities. And so hopefully we'd love to talk to you if you are doing deals that are close. by all means, we want to contribute to the community. And so if you want to have a conversation about things to think about, things that are in your diligence plan right now, we're more than happy to invest the time and share with you what we've learned. Great. Thanks so much.